Okay, at this point, we can turn our attention to gathering the appropriate documents for a case study. So if you're doing an annual model, the appropriate documents for a public company, and certainly for private companies, you're not going to find some of the filings that we're going to talk about now. We'll talk about private companies in just a moment. But for a public company, you want the latest 10K, the latest annual filing, and the corresponding fourth quarter press release and conference call transcript. So in addition to the annual filing, virtually all companies have to file. They also issue a press release that precedes the annual filing to basically talk about their fourth quarter, the final quarter's results. And that press release tends to have all the three financial statements that the 10K will then ultimately several weeks later have, as well as very important disclosures. And so that fourth quarter press release is going to be very important. And the conference call transcript is going to be very important. The conference call transcript basically refers to a conference call that most companies have to announce their fourth quarter press release. So the very same day, or maybe the next day, that the company files a press release, they're also going to have a conference call. And many services that provide transcription of these conference calls and subscription data services like Capital IQ, FactSet, Thomson all provide access to these conference call transcripts. So those are the two documents in addition to the 10K that you always want to try to get a handle on. You also want to get the latest equity research and earnings per share consensus estimates for the company that you are modeling. Again, that's if sell-side research exists. And you got to remember that sell-side research only applies to public companies. Again, this is only sort of for public companies because sell-side research does not exist for private companies. And this equity research is also available through subscription services only. You can't really find this publicly. You also want to grab the last 6 months worth of news. You want to do what's called a news run and just kind of sanity check that since the latest filing, there hasn't been a stock split or an acquisition or any other material change that would really kind of change the way you think about forecasting the company that you're dealing with. For quarterly models and LTM calculations. So up till now, we're talking about the documents that you're going to want to gather when you're doing an annual forecast. If you're doing a quarterly forecast, you're going to want to get the three latest 10Qs in addition to the latest 10K, which means let's say this is the second quarter. So you want the second quarter 10Q, the first quarter 10Q, and the prior period's third quarter 10Q. That gives you enough room to get 2 years worth of historical 10Q results. And of course, along with the 10K, you're getting the full 4 quarters. And since every Q contains current year and prior period information, you've got 2 years worth of historicals. And of course, just like with the 10K, you want corresponding press releases and conference call transcripts. So a little bit more on this press release and conference call transcripts. We touched on this a little bit. Keep in mind, it is released several weeks prior to filing the 10Qs and the 10Ks. It's less general. It contains less general detail than the 10Qs and the 10Ks, but they contain more non-GAAP disclosures typically, which is critical for analysts. So that's why you always want to grab it, even though it's a shorter document. The two primary advantages are that it's filed before the Q and the 10K, so it's fresher. So it's quite possible that there's been no 10Q for the third quarter, but there's already a third quarter press release with all the financials. So the fact that it's fresher is important. And then the other big thing is that it sometimes provides non-GAAP disclosures about things like EBITDA and non-recurring items that's going to be very important for your model. Press releases and conference call transcripts may also contain management guidance that is sometimes omitted from 10Ks and 10Qs. So the big sort of admonition here is if you ignore the press release, you may be ignoring an entire quarter of available results, especially because of the fact that it's filed prior to filing the Qs and the Ks. In terms of equity research, here's an example of the front cover of a Raymond James research report on Apple. This is used widely in investment banking and asset management to help frame forecasts. And in fact, one of the things that we talked about earlier in a prior video is that, even though we don't assume you have any industry or company knowledge for the purposes of the case study, we're going to rely quite heavily, because of that, we're going to rely quite heavily on the expertise of others. And when we talk about the expertise of others, we mean sell-side research analysts. So this is a report like this. Typically, several pages into the report, we'll have a full snapshot of forecasts and things that we can really leverage. Keep in mind the reports are almost always published within several days following a company's latest quarterly press release. So if you're looking for a report, always identify whatever, if you're doing an annual model, whatever the fourth quarter press release was, look for a report that came that day or several days afterwards. And also look for reports with full models attached with sort of screenshots of their models. This is a very common thing where an equity research report will have a screenshot of a model attached, so you can really look at the forecasts in a very quantifiable, easy to see way, because we're going to borrow a lot of those. And in fact, in our case here, we're going to do just that. We're going to find a report with full model screenshots attached and use those forecasts. Now, the last thing I'll mention about equity research reports is if you're new to an industry and you want to quickly get up to speed on an industry, there's sometimes no better way to understand an industry than to find a research report where an analyst has just initiated coverage on a company, on an industry leader in a particular space. Those initiating pieces where an analyst perhaps has moved from Goldman Sachs to Morgan Stanley, and now they're initiating coverage for Morgan Stanley. They're going to include a lot of details about the industry in general in that initiation piece, and you may have to sort of do a search about, to find those pieces, and you can filter in services like Capital IQ and FactSet by, is this an initiation piece? It's a really good way to get up to speed on an industry fairly quickly in terms of what are the drivers and how the sell-side investment community, the sell-side research community is looking at it. Now, just in terms of kind of how this is done in practice, once you've gathered all these documents, it's usually, especially in the investment banking context, usually the junior analyst gathers all the appropriate documents into a coil-bound manual, which is often called a PIB or a public information book, and then gives copies to the team. A lot of times it's hard copies, and there's a lot of annotations, and these hard copies sort of get passed around. But then there's also increasingly, as you'd imagine, soft copy PIBs, where these are all just PDFs that are being shared. And when you're using soft copy PIBs, use Control F, Control Find to help you quickly navigate through those documents. And especially with PDFs, you can also use Control Shift N to go directly to the desired page number. That's a shortcut to get to a page number that you want. In fact, I'm just going to show that to you. So if you're in an equity research report and you want to go to page 5, Control Shift N, go to page 5, and you get there. And this is a snapshot of the model that we're going to be working with shortly. Of course, you can also take advantage of a lot of things when you're working with a soft copy PIB, like highlighting and annotations that Adobe Acrobat lets you do. So definitely take advantage of that. It helps with the soft copy PIB. The final thing that I'll mention, I promised I'd say a couple of things about private companies. Really gathering historical documents for private companies is much more of a wild, wild west kind of thing. Private companies don't have to provide any financial statements. They don't have to publish anything. And so to the extent that you're dealing with a private company, the only way that you're going to get the income statement, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, is if it is provided to you by the company, by the client somehow. Once you get the information, the analysis is exactly the same. The difference between, building a three-statement model for a private company and a public company is access to information. You don't have, let's just kind of go back here, you don't have 10Ks and 10Qs, you don't have press releases. But what you may have is, if you're dealing with the private company already, if you're at a certain point in terms of whether you're active in a deal or you're discussing some investment with a private company, you will get at some point estimates and historical results from management themselves. The level of detail entirely depends on what the nature of your relationship is with the private company. Other than that, it all sort of regresses into the same types of methodologies.